Did Southwark Council get a bad deal from Lendlease? Were you hoodwinked?
No, I don't think so. I think we got a good deal at the time. If you go back to July 2010, the property market in London had collapsed. The government had withdrawn £6 billion of affordable housing subsidies. So we were negotiating a deal to get affordable housing across a site, Elephant and Castle, and 25% compared incredibly favourably to other deals that were being done around London.
So how much will the council end up making from this deal?
It's impossible to say, but I'm confident it will be north of 100 million.
Okay, and how? How will they make that money, the council?
There's an overage agreement between the council and Lendlease, so that when the costs of the development have been returned and a certain amount of level of profit to Lendlease as the developer, that we share the profit on a 50-50 basis. And I think that that's a reasonable expectation for the council. I can't be absolutely precise, but that's what I would expect.
So who decides when you hit that overage point, that surplus point?
It's set out in the contract, the terms by which the costs are recovered by the developer, the profit is recovered, the permitted profit level is recovered, and then we go into kind of shared profit. And that's similar to deals that we've done with other developers on land that we've owned or had an interest in around Southwark.
So at this point, how much is the redevelopment cost Southwark Council? And I'm talking about things like relocation costs, compensation and how much have you had to outlay?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I mean, I've seen figures that we've paid out something like £47 million, and I'm not in a position to argue against that. But a lot of these sums, come back to us and more than that in due course. I mean, there have been land payments and stage land payments that come back to us. But, I think it's important to understand Elephant and Castle, for us as a council, was not about simply profit, although we will make a profit for the people of Southwark, which will invest back into public services. This was about fundamentally changing a part of London which was crying out for change. Zone 1 Central London, which had 1,200 poor quality council houses, and whatever anybody says now, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, people did not want to live there. They were hard to let properties, and the right approach was to end the days of this sinker state and to build high quality housing, and that's what's being built down at the Elephant and Castle right now.
Okay, so the first phase of the redevelopment, Trafalgar Place, has been completed and people have already moved in, and Lendlease has already profited from this development. Has any share of the profits come back to the council yet?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer. There have been stage payments, as I say.
Because I've been told you haven't got any profits back yet. There's been no share of the profits returned.
I don't know, Steve. I'd have to look into that and come back to you with an answer on that. Land payments have been made. There are various triggers, as there is in any big contract of this nature, land payments that are triggered once we hand over bits of land to Lendlease. So we have certainly been paid for land that has been transferred to Lendlease.
Okay, I'm talking more about the profits though, because there are reports that I've seen that say the council won't see any of the profits till at least 2025. Is that right?
It depends when the project reaches profit and reaches kind of the agreed profit lines. So you could say it won't be till 2025, it could be 2021, it could be 2019. It depends how quickly the costs are recovered, and that slightly depends on where the property market moves during that period.
Yet Lendlease is already making profits out of it, and if that is the case, if the profits are delayed by up to 15 years, doesn't that mean you have been hoodwinked?
Well, I don't know that they are making profits in terms of the scheme in general. This is a scheme where Lendlease had to put hundreds of millions of pounds into the development before seeing real profit coming out of the end. You might look at a single plot and say, okay, that potentially in isolation, that property must have returned a profit. I'm not sure that's the case. I think that the grand scheme of things, the money that Lendlease have had to invest into the scheme doesn't necessarily mean they've seen a profit.
But in the last financial year, they boasted that their profits had gone up, and in part they pointed to sales at Elephant and Castle.
Well, that's across the company as a whole. I don't know whether, I can't say that, I don't know Lendlease's figures. It's pointless for me to speculate precisely. What I can tell you is that we did a good deal with Lendlease back in 2010. What we're delivering and seeing delivered at the Elephant and Castle is really high quality housing, up for the Sterling Prize, for goodness sake. This is good news. This is tenure-blind housing, which I think is a real success story.
Jerry Flynn told me that due to the contract that you've signed, you may never get any of those promised shares of the profits. Is that right?
Well, I don't know how on earth Jerry Flynn can say that. You know, there is a clear contractual agreement and expectation that profit will be shared once Lendlease have reached the agreed level of profit they're allowed to take out of the scheme. In my dealings, what I can tell you with Lendlease, they have been utterly frank, honest, and I've never believed that I'm being hoodwinked or being told a lie. They have reached agreements with me in terms of the rents paid for affordable housing, the quantity of affordable housing delivered at that site, which suggests to me that the people I'm dealing with at least are utterly honest.
Isn't it the case, though, under Section 3.7 of the Regeneration Agreement, it says that if Lendlease disposes of any interest in the land to a wholly owned group company, it disallows any profit sharing with the council?
Well, you have read the agreement more recently than I have, Steve. I read this in 2010. I go on the basis of advice that I receive, advice from a legal team, and I've no reason to doubt that the council will not get profit out of this at the end of the day.
Okay.
Why would Lendlease, that wants to do more work in London, come into London and deliberately hoodwink a council and then welch on a deal? That is not the kind of company that is serious about staying in London. Now, if you're saying this is a fly-by-night company who will be here today and gone tomorrow, you might well have justification for what you're putting to me. I don't see any justification.
Okay, but isn't that what they've done? They've purchased the land and then they've sold the finished product to Lendlease residential companies, and therefore under Section 3.7 they could avoid any obligation to share profits with the council.
I'm not expecting that, Steve. All I can tell you, every element of agreement that we've reached with Lendlease has been honoured by them. We've seen them payments coming forward to us from One the Elephant, which is part of the scheme, which will pay for an entirely new leisure centre down at the Elephant and Castle. You know, you can pick agreements like this apart and put individual clauses to me, which I'm not going to be able to comment on because I didn't know you were going to go clause by clause through the agreement today. What I can tell you is that this is a major regeneration scheme, one which is good for London, which is good for Southwark, and which is going to be providing much needed housing for Londoners.
Okay, Jerry Flynn though picked out that piece of the contract and he published it on his website, and he seemed to be saying this is the point where Lendlease is going to avoid having to share their profits with Southwark Council. Did that section of the contract set off alarm bells for you at the time when you signed it?
Look, I think there are a handful of people in Southwark, in London, who are opposed to seeing massive regeneration schemes happen. Jerry Flynn is one of them. And, you can pour through any agreement or any contract, your mobile phone operator, your power provider, and find clauses which you say, my God, if they invoke that clause, I'd be really up the creek without a paddle. But it doesn't happen. It's not going to happen in this situation.
And what
either.
if Lendlease does do that? What would you do?
Well, if they do that, we would look for whatever remedies we can. I'd be amazed, though, if that were the case. As I say, I have no basis to believe that would be the case. This is a company which, in dealing with me, have operated on the basis of good faith and honesty.
All right. Southwark has set a minimum of 35% of affordable housing stock on new developments. Why didn't you get 35% on this deal? Why let this big Australian developer negotiate you down to 25%?
Because at the time that we did the deal in July 2010, the property market in London had collapsed. The government had withdrawn £6 billion of subsidy from affordable housing, which meant that rather than a subsidy of between £120,000 and £150,000 per property for affordable housing, you were getting something like £20,000. It fundamentally changed the economics of the scheme. And so we could have left it to the planning process and seen what came out at each stage of the planning process. But we wanted a guaranteed minimum level of affordable housing, and that is what we've got. And 25%, as I say, stands pretty well in comparison to other schemes across London which were negotiated at that time. And for a scheme of this duration and of this size, I think it was important to have that guaranteed minimum rather than leaving it to what the property market was doing, which would have delivered probably less than 10% affordable housing in the first phase, which would have been disastrous for the people of Southwark, and might well have fallen back again. We're already seeing the property market turning in London again.
But the viability assessment showed Lendlease would make a profit of around 25%. That's about 10% higher than normal. Doesn't that suggest that they could afford to put more affordable housing in and meet that 35% target?
Well, the profit level which companies get out ranges around about the 20-25%. I don't think that that's a particularly unusual figure for this scheme. I don't think we could, because I think if you look at the what the viability was showing, even with that 25% profit, was much less than 25% affordable housing being delivered across the scheme. It was something like 15%, 16% it would have been delivered. So 25% in that context is good.
Okay, a former resident forced to leave the estate spent 3 years trying to access the viability assessment that explained why the council accepted that figure at less than 35%. And it cost you £50,000 in legal fees to fight that over 3 years. Why did you fight it so hard for so long? Were you embarrassed about that document getting out in public?
No, I wasn't embarrassed, and we weren't embarrassed. There was an agreement, a confidentiality agreement that was in the contract as to the viability assessment, and that was the basis on which the viability assessment was produced, in common with every other planning application at that time that Southwark dealt with.
But don't people in Southwark have a right to know
They
why
do,
they
do, and they do now, and we have the most open and transparent process with regard to viability assessments of any council.
Is that open and
London.
transparent, though, not allowing a document to be published for 3 years and fighting it in the courts to suppress it?
Well, we did oppose, as I said, because we had a contractual obligation effectively to say this is information which has been given to us on this basis.
So why sign the contract if you believe in transparency?
If you gave me a bit of information, you say I'm giving you this information to you on the basis of confidentiality and expect that confidentiality to be observed, it would be, I think, remiss of me to say, oh, I'm going to go out and spread that bit of information. That was the basis on which information was exchanged at that time. That was not unusual. That was the same as is done with many planning applications at that time, not just in Southwark, but across London. Every planning application. We're moving into an era of greater transparency, and that's what we're doing. And no, I was more than happy to turn that information over, and I think it's people have now looked through the deal, and actually nobody has come back. Nobody's come back and said you could deliver 35% affordable housing. Nobody.
Okay, affordable housing means 80% of the market rate, doesn't it? Now, in reality, there's very few homes in these new developments for working class people. What used to be 1,200 homes of social housing will in reality be around 80 now when it comes to social rent, won't it?
There's going to be, well, 25% of the housing across the development is affordable housing. That falls into a number of categories. Part of it is affordable to buy, so shared ownership, and half of it is for rent. The rented housing, 1 and 2 bed properties are at 50% of market rent, and then anything above that is at social rents, which is about 30-35% of market rent. So there are no properties which are being rented at the Elephant and Castle at 80% of market rent. Look, the point is, nobody wanted to live on the Heygate estate. It was hard to let. It was sink estate housing.
But there is a reason. Wanted to come back, didn't they?
And they can come back, and the people are coming back. There is a reason why World War Z, a zombie movie, was filmed on the Heygate estate. There is a reason why Harry Brown, a vigilante movie starring Michael Caine, was filmed on the Heygate estate, because it's unpleasant, unwelcoming, and didn't work for the people who lived there. People can come back, and they are asked, do you want to move back when properties become available?
And
why wouldn't they want to come
for
back?
example, how many have moved back into the first phase, Trafalgar?
It's a handful of people who have moved back.
So that's not many, is it?
No, but many people are very happy. If you look across, the vision behind the regeneration of the Elephant and Castle was not simply to replace 1,200 failing social housing units with 1,200 failing social housing units. That would be a completely pointless exercise. What we've done is built will have built 1,750 affordable housing units across a slightly wider area. A lot of people who lived on the former Heygate estate have moved to those properties which are very close to the Heygate estate and very happy there. Others have moved further within the borough But if you were a tenant on the Heygate estate, you had the absolute choice of where you moved to, and you do have a right to return. Now, not everybody's going to want to come back, but those who do can exercise that right, and they are.
But many of them can't afford to move back in, and they've moved to the fringes of London, and many of these people were...
No. If you were a tenant there, you stayed within Southwark if that's what you wanted to do.
If they could find a place that they could afford in.
No. Absolutely not. No, you moved as a council tenant to another council property. Now, there's a difference with the leaseholders. If you're a leaseholder, if you'd exercise your right to buy, then it might be that you found that what we paid in terms of compensation wasn't enough to rehouse you in Southwark, and some people did move outside London.
So bearing that in mind, can you understand why people in those working class communities can feel like they've been driven out?
No, because they've not been driven out. You know,
if they were leasing and the compensation's not enough for them to afford to lease another place, they are driven out, aren't they?
Well, people have moved. Some people have moved out of London. I have to acknowledge that. But you know, the point is, this was about creating a really vibrant and viable mixed tenure community, and that is what we're achieving there. And you know, I'm really sorry if people have had to move away from London. If you're a leaseholder, something like 150 leaseholders at the Heygate estate. And in subsequent regeneration schemes, I think we've made better offers than we did at the Heygate, if I'm honest. So a lot of people were bought out before we became the administration in 2010. There were only a handful of people left when we became the administration. So we've improved things. I accept that is slightly problematic, and we learn lessons from it. But was the overall vision right for Southwark, right for London? Absolutely. I mean, one thing to bear in mind, over the last 6 years in Southwark, we've seen an increase in employment of those aged 16 to 64 of over 10%. Over 10%. In contrast to a borough north of the river like Camden, 1% increase. So we're getting people into work because we're seeing investment coming into the borough. We set up a construction skills centre that Lendlease is sponsoring down at the Elephant and Castle, which will be getting hundreds of local people into work in the booming construction industry in our city. Now that's got to be good news. Ultimately, that's got to be good news, because without, you know, if creating work for people means they're healthier, they're more economically independent, you know, it's good news all round for them.
There's a criticism that you've got too close to Lendlease, that you accepted free tickets to the London Olympics opening ceremony, that they flew you to the south of France. Have you got too close to Lendlease?
No, absolutely not.
So why accept those freebies from them?
I was offered the opportunity to go to the Olympic opening ceremony and to meet the worldwide board who were going to be there, and I did, and discussed issues with them about the Elephant and Castle. And I think until that point, I'm not sure the whole board was convinced that the Elephant and Castle should be their #1 priority in London. So it's about making the case as well. In terms of going to the south of France to talk to others about what we're doing at the Elephant and Castle at a seminar, you know, I think that was a worthwhile thing as well. You know, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. I mean, at the same time as I was there, I talked to the Mayor of London, secured the extension of the Bakerloo line, a tube line, through Southwark.
So you could have spoken to the Mayor of London at a coffee shop?
No, not in the, no. Well, trying to get hold of Boris Johnson to have a meaningful conversation with him at that time was virtually impossible when he wasn't surrounded by advisors, and actually getting his commitment was very worthwhile. So, you know, you can throw these things, oh, you know, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But we're a borough that is open for business, that is determined to get the very best quality housing for our residents, determined to get our residents into work. And anything that promotes that and promotes the interests of the residents I represent, I will do.
There are other former council employees who've gone on to work for Lendlease. You know, is there a perception that that's a problem as well?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, I don't know. You know, why? Perception, but reality, no.
Okay. All right, I'm happy with that. Is there any other points you think are important to make?
No, I don't think so. I think I've made those points.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Thanks so much for doing that. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.